It was supposed to be our first time there. The night felt perfect, quiet, familiar, too familiar. I didn't see lipstick, I didn't smell perfume, just something small. Something his phone remembered that I didn't. And from that moment, I stopped asking questions. Because sometimes the truth doesn't hide in what he says. It hides in what connects automatically. I remember the way his hand felt against mine that evening. Warm, familiar, the kind of touch that once made me feel chosen. My hands told a different story than his. While his were clean, with the permanent grease stains of a mechanic settled into the creases of his knuckles, mine carried the evidence of my work. Small scratches from rose thorns, a green tinge under the nails from eucalyptus stems, the faint chemical smell of preservative solution that never quite washed away. I'd been arranging funeral wreaths all afternoon. White lilies and baby's breath, flowers that spoke the language of endings. Now I wondered if I'd been composing my own. We'd been driving for 40 minutes, through roads I didn't recognize, past strip malls and gas stations that all looked like the same in the dark. The dashboard lights cast his face in blue-green shadows. He'd said he found this place online. Quiet, discreet. Somewhere we could just be ourselves without the weight of our usual world pressing down on us. I didn't ask why we needed to drive so far. I just held his hand and watched the streetlights blur past my window, each one a small moment of brightness, followed by darkness. The motel appeared suddenly, tucked behind a row of palm trees that looked silver in the artificial light, its sign glowing soft pink against the night sky. Motel Mirage. The letters flickered slightly, the kind of old neon that hums when you stand too close to it, that buzzes with a frequency you feel in your teeth. He pulled into the lot and I watched something shift in his body language. His shoulders relaxed, his grip on the steering wheel loosened, and he didn't hesitate, didn't circle looking for a spot, didn't pull up near the office first. He drove directly to a space near the back, third row, tucked between two larger vehicles, away from the direct sightline of the lobby windows. The precision of it caught in my chest, like a thorn I'd missed while stripping stems. He'd chosen this spot the way I chose vases, with the practiced eye of someone who'd done it before. The building was L-shaped, 2 stories, painted a tired cream color that might have been white once. Most of the windows were dark. A few had curtains drawn, backlit by the blue glow of televisions. It looked like every other roadside motel I'd ever seen. Anonymous. Forgettable. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hand still on the wheel, staring at the building. Then he smiled at me, that easy smile I'd fallen for years ago, and said he'd be right back with the key. I watched him walk to the office, his gait relaxed, familiar. Through the glass, I could see him talking to someone at the desk, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun. He didn't look around, didn't orient himself. He knew exactly where to stand, exactly where the desk was, exactly how this transaction worked. He pulled out his wallet, nodded, laughed at something the woman said. He looked like a regular customer. And I sat there in the silence after the engine stopped, feeling something I couldn't name yet, a kind of stillness that wasn't peace. The way a vase feels when you've arranged flowers in it, but something about the composition is off, unbalanced, wrong in a way you can't immediately identify, but can definitely feel. I looked down at my hands in my lap, at the thorn scratches and the permanent green stain on my right index finger from years of working with stems. Hands that built beautiful things, hands that created moments of joy for other people, birthdays, anniversaries, celebrations. Hands that were about to learn what it felt like to be holding on to something already dead. He came back with a key, an actual metal key attached to a plastic tag with a room number embossed on it. Not a key card, the analog kind that spoke of a place that hadn't changed in decades, that had no digital record of who came and went, that left no electronic trail. Room 207. He held it up like a prize, grinned, said something about how retro it was. His thumb rubbed across the plastic tag in a way that looked automatic, muscle memory, the way my fingers knew exactly how much pressure to apply when wiring a boutonniere, how to work without thinking because I'd done it so many times before. We gathered our things. He'd brought a small duffel bag, navy blue, the same one he took to the gym. I'd brought nothing except my purse and the version of myself that still wanted to believe this was romantic. The stairs creaked as we climbed to the second floor. The hallway smelled like old carpet and air freshener trying too hard to be lavender, the synthetic kind, nothing like real lavender, which smells green and soft and honest. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear a television playing, voices muffled through walls. He unlocked the door and held it open for me, his hand on the small of my back, guiding me inside. The gesture felt tender, protective. I'd always loved that about him, the way he'd open doors, pull out chairs, touch me like I was something precious. Now I wondered how many other women he'd guided through this exact door with that exact touch. I stepped inside. The room was exactly what I expected. Queen bed with a burgundy comforter that had probably been washed 1,000 times, its color faded to something between rust and dried blood. Nightstand with a lamp, the shades slightly crooked. Small television on a dresser, its screen dark and reflective. Bathroom visible through an open door, white tiles reflecting fluorescent light. Clean enough, impersonal enough. He set his bag down and moved around the space with a fluidity that made my stomach tighten. He didn't look around the way people do in unfamiliar places. He walked directly to the thermostat and adjusted it. Knew exactly where it was, mounted on the wall near the bathroom, had his hand on it before I'd even finished setting down my purse. He moved to the television and turned it on, then immediately lowered the volume to barely audible, a specific level that provided ambient noise without intrusion. He didn't fidget with the remote, didn't click through to find the right setting. He knew the right setting. He crossed to the window and drew the curtains closed in one smooth motion, his hands finding the pull cord without looking for it, drawing them so they overlapped perfectly in the middle, eliminating the gap that would let in the parking lot light. Every movement was choreographed by familiarity. I stood near the door, still holding my purse, watching him arrange the room the way I arranged flowers, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what the final composition should look like. He turned and smiled again, crossed the room and kissed my forehead, his hand settling on my waist, told me he'd been looking forward to this all week, to having me to himself. No interruptions, no obligations, just us. Just us in a room he'd been to before. I leaned into him because that's what I'd always done. Let myself be held because being held meant being wanted. Let his arms create the illusion of safety, even as everything inside me began to understand that safety had been a mirage all along. The word echoed in my mind, mirage, like the motel's name, like everything I'd been seeing for 3 years. A beautiful distortion, a trick of light and distance. Something that looked real until you got close enough to see it was just empty air and your own desperate need to believe in oases. He suggested we order food, said there was a pizza place that delivered until midnight. He pulled out his phone, the screen lighting up his face, in that particular way screens do, casting shadows under his eyes, turning his features into something I didn't quite recognize. And that's when it happened. That's when the first real crack appeared in the foundation of everything I'd built my life on. He sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, scrolling through delivery options. The mattress dipped under his weight, the springs making a small sound of recognition. He shifted slightly, automatically adjusting his position, and I realized he knew exactly where the firm spots were, where the mattress had been worn down by other bodies, other nights. I moved to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly with one finger, looked out at the parking lot. Our car was still there, streetlight catching the hood, turning it silver. A few other vehicles scattered around like chess pieces in an endgame. A pickup truck with mud on the wheel wells, a sedan with out-of-state plates. Normal. Everything looked normal. But I'd learned in my work that normal was often where the poison hid. The most toxic flowers were often the most beautiful. Oleander with its perfect pink blossoms. Lily of the valley with its delicate white bells. All deadly if you knew where to bite. He asked again what kind of pizza I wanted. I said anything was fine. He laughed, said I always said that he just picked something I liked. Pepperoni and mushroom. My favorite, he said. The way he said it, casual, affectionate, familiar, should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like watching someone perform a role they'd rehearsed so many times they'd forgotten it was a performance at all. I turned from the window and watched him. Really watched him, the way I watched flowers under my hands, looking for brown edges, for signs of decay, for the subtle indicators that something was dying from the inside even while it still looked beautiful on the surface. The way he touched the screen, the slight furrow in his brow as he read the menu, the way his shoulders relaxed now that we were here, now that we were inside, now that the door was closed and locked and the curtains were drawn. He looked content. He looked like someone who'd come home. The thought arrived softly, without drama. Just a small voice in the back of my mind, whispering something I immediately tried to silence. I sat down in the chair near the dresser. It was positioned at an angle, facing both the bed and the television, upholstered in a pattern that might have been floral once, but was now just abstract shapes in brown and beige. There was a mirror above the dresser, and I caught my reflection. I looked tired. My hair was loose, falling past my shoulders the way he liked it. I was wearing the dress he'd once said made me look beautiful, dark blue with small buttons down the front, the fabric soft and worn from too many washings. I'd dressed for him. I'd dressed to be seen by him, to be desired. I looked at myself and wondered who I was trying to convince. The dresser surface was scarred with water rings, overlapping circles where glasses and bottles had been set down without coasters. Over and over, by hundreds of people in hundreds of temporary intimacies. I counted them. 7 distinct rings, but 2 of them were doubled. 2 circular marks so close together they created a figure 8, the universal symbol of infinity. Or of 2 drinks sitting side by side. 2 people. Together. He ordered the pizza, set his phone down on the nightstand, stood and stretched, his shirt riding up slightly, revealing the familiar line of his stomach, the small scar near his hip from a childhood fall off a bike. He caught me looking and grinned. Asked if I wanted to put on some music, make the place feel less like a motel room. I said, okay. He picked up his phone again. That's when I saw it. The screen was still awake from ordering food, and in the top corner, just visible before he tilted the phone away, I saw the Wi-Fi icon. Not the empty fan shape that meant searching, not the fan with an X that meant unable to connect. The full icon. Solid. Connected. My breath stopped somewhere between my lungs and my throat. He hadn't connected to the Wi-Fi. He hadn't opened settings. He hadn't asked for a password. He hadn't done anything except pick up his phone. And yet it was connected, automatically, the way phones connect when they remember a network, when they've been there before, when they've stored the credentials and the access point and the digital fingerprint of a place. I worked with a point-of-sale system at my shop. I knew how Wi-Fi worked. I knew that phones didn't just randomly connect to networks they'd never seen. Networks had unique identifiers, even if two places had the same name displayed to users, but underlying MAC addresses were different. Phones didn't confuse them. They remembered exact places, not similar ones. He was scrolling through music now, humming to himself, completely unaware of the crack that had just split through the center of my world. He asked if I liked a particular playlist, something called Late Night Vibes, said it was chill, perfect for relaxing. I said yes. I'm not sure I even heard what he said. My ears were ringing with the sound of my own pulse, loud and insistent. The music started, something soft and ambient, jazz with electronic elements, the kind of music meant to fill silence without demanding attention. And I realized I didn't recognize it. In 3 years together, we'd built a shared musical vocabulary. I knew his favorite songs, he knew mine. We had playlists we'd made together for road trips, for cooking dinner, for Sunday mornings. This wasn't one of them. This was someone else's playlist, or a playlist he'd made for someone else, for these nights, for this room. He set his phone down again on the nightstand, face down this time, the charging cable already plugged in. He hadn't looked for an outlet, hadn't felt along the wall or bent down to check behind the nightstand. He'd just reached back and found the outlet exactly where he knew it would be. Muscle memory. He came over to where I was sitting, held out his hand, asked me to dance with him. There, in that motel room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and carried the weight of 1,000 temporary intimacies, he wanted to dance. His hand was extended toward me, palm up, waiting. I could see the lines in his palm, the ones I'd traced with my fingers in better moments, when I'd believed that reading his palm might tell me our future. I took his hand because I didn't know what else to do, because the alternative was to ask the question that was screaming in my mind, and I wasn't ready for the answer. He pulled me close, one hand on my waist, the other holding mine against his chest. We swayed gently, barely moving, his chin resting on top of my head. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and calm, the rhythm of someone unburdened. And I let him hold me while my mind screamed, while every molecule in my body wanted to pull away, to demand answers, to ask him how his phone knew this network, why it connected automatically, what else he hadn't told me, who else had stood in this exact spot with him while this exact music played. But I didn't. I just stood there, pressed against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and calm, while mine shattered into arrhythmia. He whispered that he loved me, said it so easily, so naturally, like the words still meant what they used to mean, like they weren't being spoken in a room that proved they were lies. I closed my eyes, and I lied back. I whispered it back because that's what you do when someone says they love you. You return the words like a transaction, like a receipt, like proof of purchase for a relationship that might already be expired. We stayed like that for what might have been minutes or hours. Time had become elastic, unreliable. The music played on, song after song I didn't recognize, building a soundtrack to the dissolution of everything I'd believed in. When we finally separated, he kissed me gently, said he needed to use the bathroom, disappeared behind the door, and I heard him washing his hands, the sound of him washing his hands. I looked at his phone on the nightstand, face down, screen dark.
charging, keeping its secrets in the darkness. The pizza arrived 30 minutes later. The knock on the door was soft, apologetic. The knock of someone used to delivering to places where discretion matters. He answered it, paid in cash. I noticed that. The cash, the absence of any credit card transaction that would leave a record, brought the box to the bed.
We ate sitting cross-legged on the comforter, the television on low, playing some crime drama neither of us was really watching. The pizza was good, hot. Everything about it was normal, except for the fact that nothing was normal at all. He talked about work, about the project he was finishing at the shop, a restoration on a '67 Mustang that had been in someone's garage for 30 years, about the guys he worked with, and their endless jokes about his meticulous attention to detail, about how they called him the perfectionist because he couldn't stand to leave anything half-finished. The irony wasn't lost on me. He laughed at his own stories, wiping pizza grease on a napkin, completely at ease. The television flickered, casting blue light across his face. I nodded, smiled when I was supposed to smile, took small bites even though the food tasted like cardboard in my mouth. My eyes kept drifting to his phone. It was face down on the nightstand now, charging. The cable snaked down to an outlet he'd found without looking for it, like he knew where it would be. I tried to push the thought away, tried to find some rational explanation. Maybe the motel had a common network name. Maybe his phone had connected to something similar before. But I knew how phones worked. They remembered specific networks, exact names, unique configurations. They remembered where they'd been. He finished eating, crumpled a napkin, and stretched out on the bed, patted the space next to him, and told me to come lie down. I gathered the pizza box, closed it, and set it on the dresser next to the overlapping water rings, the doubled marks, the figure 8. How many times? I lay down next to him. He pulled me close, my head on his shoulder, his arm around me. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my arm. Comfortable, familiar, like we'd done this 100 times. Maybe we had. Maybe I just hadn't been there for all of them. The thought was so clear, so complete, that I had to bite my lip to keep from gasping. I tasted blood, sharp, metallic, real in a way nothing else felt right now. He asked if I was okay, said I seemed quiet tonight, distant. I told him I was just tired. Work had been busy. My hands hurt from cutting stems all day. He kissed the top of my head, sympathetic, kind, said we could just rest, that there was no rush, that we had all night. All night in a room his phone recognized. All night in a place he'd promised was new, an adventure, somewhere we'd never been. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, tried to match the rhythm of his, slow and even, the breath of someone unburdened by secrets. But my mind wouldn't stop. It pulled up every late night he'd worked, every weekend project that ran long, every time he'd distracted, looking at his phone and smiling at something he didn't share. Every time I'd asked if something was wrong and he'd said, "No, everything's fine. I'm just tired." The same words I'd just given him. The lies we tell to keep the peace. The lies we tell to keep the illusion alive.
He started to doze. I could feel his breathing deepen, his body relaxing into sleep. His arm grew heavier across my waist, and I lay there, perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, at the textured surface with its small imperfections, at the smoke detector with its blinking red light, pulsing like a heartbeat, like a warning. At the edge of the curtain where a thin line of orange light from the parking lot seeped through. I lay there and felt something inside me begin to crystallize. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something colder. Something like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when the last piece of a puzzle clicks into place and you finally see the whole picture, even though you wish you could unsee it. I thought about his hand in mine during the drive, the way he'd smiled at me, the way he'd said he loved me while we danced. And I wondered if any of it had been real, or if I'd just been watching someone play a part, someone who'd perfected the performance of devotion while his phone quietly testified to the truth. My phone was in my purse, on the chair by the window. Slowly, carefully, I slid out from under his arm. He stirred slightly, but didn't wake. I moved across the room, my footsteps silent on the thin carpet. I picked up my purse, pulled out my phone, opened the settings, clicked on Wi-Fi, and there it was. Motel Mirage. The network name that his phone had known, that had welcomed him back like an old friend. I stared at it for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the connect button. But I didn't need to connect, to understand. I already knew everything I needed to know. I sat in that chair for a long time, phone dark in my hands, watching him sleep. He looked peaceful, one arm stretched above his head, his chest rising and falling in that steady rhythm, his face relaxed, free from whatever masks he wore when awake. He looked like someone with nothing to hide. That's what made it worse. The ease with which he carried his deception, the way he could lie next to me, hold me, tell me he loved me, and then fall asleep without the weight of guilt pressing down on his chest. I wondered how long it had been going on, how many times he'd driven this road, walked up those stairs, unlocked this door or one just like it. How many times he'd laid in this bed with someone else, held them the way he'd held me, whispered the same words he'd whispered to me. Maybe the same playlist had been playing. Maybe he'd ordered the same pizza. Maybe I was just the latest iteration of a routine he'd perfected. The thought should have destroyed me, should have left me sobbing on the floor, unable to breathe. But it didn't. Instead, I felt something else, something unexpected, distance. Like I was watching this scene from somewhere outside myself, observing it with the detached curiosity of someone watching a film they'd already guessed the ending to. I looked around the room with new eyes, the burgundy comforter that probably witnessed 100 infidelities, the mirror above the dresser that had reflected 100 different faces, the bathroom with its small wrapped soaps and thin towels. Everything designed to be forgettable, to leave no trace. A room for people who needed to disappear from their real lives for a few hours.
I'd thought we were here for privacy, for intimacy, for each other. But he was just here for the forgetting. I stood and walked to the bathroom, turned on the light, looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. My reflection stared back at me. Same face, same eyes, but something had shifted behind them. I looked older, not in years, but in understanding. I thought about all the times I'd looked at this face and tried to make myself beautiful for him, worthy of him, enough for him. And I realized now that it had never been about me. His need for this, for other rooms, other women, other versions of connection, had nothing to do with what I lacked. It was about what he lacked. The inability to be satisfied, to be present, to be honest. I turned off the bathroom light and returned to the chair. He was still sleeping. The music had stopped at some point, leaving only the ambient sounds of the motel. Distant traffic, the hum of the air conditioning unit, footsteps in the room above us. I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapped my arms around them, and watched him. And I made a decision. Not in anger, not in hurt, but in something clearer than both. I would let him sleep. I would let this night play out exactly as he'd planned it. I wouldn't confront him, wouldn't demand explanations, wouldn't give him the opportunity to lie more convincingly. Because I realized something important. I didn't need his version of the truth. The truth was already here, in the Wi-Fi signal, in the ease with which he navigated this space, in the way he'd chosen a room so far from our real life that he'd thought the distance would protect his secret. He'd been right about one thing. This place was perfect for not being remembered. But his phone had remembered. And now I would too. I thought about tomorrow, about the drive home, about the way he'd probably kiss me goodbye at my door and tell me he'd call me later, about how he'd go back to his life, relieved that he'd managed another successful performance. I thought about the version of myself who would have begged for answers, who would have screamed and cried and demanded to know why I wasn't enough. But that version felt far away now, like someone I used to know but had outgrown. This version, the one sitting in this chair in this motel room at 2 a.m, had no questions left to ask. This version already knew. I thought about a moment early in our relationship. It was winter, almost 4 years ago. We'd gone to the botanical gardens because I'd wanted to see the winter blooms, the camellias. He'd held my hand and listened while I explained the varieties. He'd seemed fascinated, had asked questions. I'd thought then that I'd found someone who could appreciate beauty, who understood that care and attention were how you kept living things alive. Maybe he had been genuine then. Maybe people could love you truly and still betray you completely. Maybe fidelity wasn't about love at all, but about character, about the choices you made when no one was watching. Except his phone had been watching, had been keeping records. I looked at him sleeping there, this person I'd loved, this person I'd built a life with, and I felt the last threads of that future dissolve like sugar in water, sweet for a moment, then gone. The hours passed slowly. I didn't sleep, didn't even close my eyes, just sat there, watching him, memorizing this moment. The last time I would choose to be in his presence. The last time I would let him touch me with hands that had touched others. The last time I would let his lies fill the space between us. Around 4 a.m, he stirred, rolled over, reached across the bed for me, his hand searching the empty space. Found nothing. He sat up slowly, disoriented, squinting in the darkness. Saw me sitting in the chair. Asked if I was okay. Why I wasn't in bed. His voice was rough with sleep, concerned, genuinely worried. I told him I couldn't sleep, that I'd just been thinking. He asked what about, rubbing his eyes, trying to wake up fully. I looked at him for a long moment, at his sleep-creased face, at his genuine confusion, and I smiled. Told him nothing important, just thinking about the shop, about the orders I needed to fill this week, about a wedding on Saturday that needed 200 white roses. The lie came easily, flowed naturally, because I'd learned from him, apparently. He relaxed visibly, lay back down, told me to come back to bed, that I needed rest. I said I would in a minute, just needed to use the bathroom first. He closed his eyes, told me he loved me. The words hung in the air like cut flowers without water, beautiful for a moment, already dying. I didn't respond. Within minutes, his breathing deepened again, back to sleep, back to peace. And I continued my vigil, watching the darkness slowly give way to dawn, waiting for the moment when I could leave this place and never look back. The first light came just after 6, not sunrise yet, but that pre-dawn glow that turns everything silver and unreal, that makes the world look like it's holding its breath before the day begins. I watched it creep through the gap in the curtains, slow and inevitable. Watched the room slowly emerge from darkness, the shapes gaining definition, the colors returning.
Everything looked exactly as it had when we'd arrived, as if the night had changed nothing. But it had changed everything. He was still asleep. He'd probably sleep for another hour at least. He'd always been a heavy sleeper, the kind of person who could rest through anything, even the quiet destruction of his relationship. I stood slowly, my body stiff from sitting in that chair for so long. My legs had gone numb at some point and now tingled painfully as circulation returned. I gathered my things silently, my purse, my phone, the few items I'd brought. I moved like a ghost, silent, careful, not because I was trying to sneak away, but because I wanted to leave without ceremony, without the messiness of a confrontation he didn't deserve, without giving him the chance to explain, to justify, to make me doubt what I knew, without giving him anything more of myself.
I paused at the bathroom and looked in one more time. At the wrapped soaps I'd noticed earlier. There were 2 of them in a small basket, along with 2 wrapped plastic cups and 2 small bottles of lotion. 2 of everything. The room knew what it was for. In the closet by the door, I noticed something I'd missed before. An extra towel folded on the shelf. Not the standard 2 that were hanging on the bathroom rack, but a third one. If 2 people needed to shower separately, to remove evidence. The details testified. I returned to the bedroom and looked at him one last time. He was on his side now, facing away from me, the comforter pulled up to his shoulder. I could see the back of his neck, the hairline I'd traced with my fingers so many times. He looked vulnerable in sleep, almost innocent. I tried to find some anger, some desire for revenge or justice, or at least acknowledgement. But I felt nothing except a profound sense of release. Like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years and was finally exhaling. I thought about leaving a note, something poetic about betrayal and phones and the things we think we can hide. But words felt inadequate. And more than that, I realized I didn't owe him an explanation. He'd made his choices without consulting me, without considering how they'd impact me. I could make mine the same way. I pulled out my phone one last time, opened the Wi-Fi settings. Motel Mirage was still there, still offering connection. I tapped on it. The options appeared. Connect, forget this network. I tapped forget. A confirmation appeared. Forget Motel Mirage. You won't automatically connect to it anymore. I tapped forget again. It disappeared from my list. Erased. Gone, as if it had never existed in my phone's memory. I wish I could do the same with my own memories, but I knew I wouldn't want to even if I could. Because this pain, this clarity, this moment of choosing myself, it was worth remembering. Not to dwell on, but to remember that I'd been strong enough to leave, that I'd valued myself enough to walk away, that I'd chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over illusion. I turned the door handle slowly. The mechanism clicked softly, loud in the silent room, but he didn't stir. I slipped out into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind me with a quiet snick that felt like a period at the end of a sentence. Final, complete, done. The hallway was empty, silent. Dawn light filtered through a window at the end of the corridor, pale and clean. I walked to the stairs. My footsteps barely made a sound, each step taking me further from him, further from that room, further from the version of myself who'd walked up these stairs last night still believing in us. Down to the parking lot, where the early morning air was cool and smelled like dew and distant ocean. Our car was still there, but my own car was back home. I'd need to call a rideshare. I pulled out my phone. The rideshare arrived 10 minutes later, a quiet woman in a sedan who asked no questions about why I was being picked up from a motel at 6 a.m. I gave her my address, sat back against the seat, watched Motel Mirage disappear in the rearview mirror.
As we drove, the sun began to rise properly. Real light now.
gold and orange and pink spreading across the sky. A new day. A new version of myself. I thought about my shop, about the flowers waiting for me there, about the orders I'd fill and the arrangements I'd create, about building a life from beautiful things, from growth and color and the natural cycle of things blooming and fading and blooming again. About how I'd spent 3 years trying to be enough for someone who'd never learned how to be enough for himself. And I realized I was done trying, done performing, done pretending, done letting someone else's inability to commit become my reason to doubt my own worth. My phone buzzed. A text. "Where are you? Woke up and you're gone. Everything okay?" I looked at the message for a long moment. Then, I turned off my phone. Not forever, but for now. For this morning. For this drive home through streets washed in gold light and possibility. I'd respond eventually. Tell him it was over. Keep it simple. No accusations, no demands for explanation. Just a clean break. A disconnection. The same way his phone had disconnected from a network that no longer served me. The driver took a turn I recognized. We were getting close to my neighborhood. To my apartment. To my life. The life I'd get to rebuild now. Alone but not lonely. Free but not adrift. Whole in a way I hadn't been even before I met him. Because sometimes wholeness isn't about adding someone else to your life. Sometimes it's about subtracting the things that were quietly eroding you from within. The car pulled up in front of my building. I thanked the driver, stepped out into the morning. The air smelled like jasmine from the neighbor's garden, like coffee from the cafe down the street, like all the ordinary beautiful things I'd stopped noticing. I walked to my door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I'd come home. Not just to a place, but to myself. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, went to the window and opened the curtains, letting the morning light flood in. Then I went to my workbench, where I kept my tools, my shears and wire and floral tape, where I kept the flowers I was working on. I had a wedding on Saturday. 200 white roses. It would take days to condition them properly, to strip the thorns and leaves, to wire each one so it would hold its shape, to arrange them into something beautiful. I picked up my shears, felt their familiar weight in my hand, looked at the flowers waiting to be transformed, and I began to compose something new. Not for someone else this time, for myself. A new arrangement, a new beginning, a new life built from beautiful things and hard truths, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to choose clarity over comfort. Outside, the city continued waking up. People starting their days, cars passing on the street, the world moving forward the way it always did. I cut the first stem, stripped the thorns, and began.
Sometimes the truth doesn't announce itself with drama or confrontation. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a single moment of technological honesty. A phone connecting to a network it shouldn't remember, a Wi-Fi signal that testifies when a person tries to hide. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't demanding answers or seeking revenge. It's simply walking away, knowing that your questions have already been answered by the one witness that couldn't lie, that your worth was never determined by someone else's ability to see it, but by your own ability to recognize it within yourself. That connection isn't just something we share with others, it's something we must first maintain with ourselves. In the end, we are all like flowers, beautiful not despite our thorns, but because we know when to bloom and when to let go of what's already wilted. And the most important arrangement we'll ever create is the one we compose with our own life, choosing carefully what stays and what must be forgotten, like a network we no longer need, like a mirage we finally learned to see through.